On the first day I died, my boyfriend brought his first love home. They were kissing shamelessly on the couch I bought, eating celery dumplings I handmade, playing the game console I gifted him. One day, Charlotte curiously asked, "Where's Susan?" My boyfriend calmly replied, "We had an argument a few days ago, so she went on a business trip." Oh, he still didn't know I was already dead. Chapter 1. On Edward's birthday, I got into a car accident on my way back, and died on the spot. My soul floated above, wanting to see Edward one last time. I happened to see Edward bringing his first love, Charlotte, to our home. In the dim light, Charlotte's pale face flushed, looking somewhat intoxicated, hanging on Edward like she had no bones. "Edward, Edward." Edward steadied her waist, helping her tidy her messy hair, patiently responding to her calls. The usually aloof Edward only showed such tenderness towards her. Seeing this scene, even though I was prepared, my heart still stung. Since learning about Charlotte's divorce, Edward had been distracted, coming home less frequently, becoming more distant from me. I found out that Charlotte's ex-husband's company went bankrupt, and he fled with the money. Charlotte only discovered she was pregnant after the divorce, and debt collectors harassed her daily, nearly causing her to miscarry several times. These days, Edward had been at the hospital with her. I argued with Edward because he wanted to bring Charlotte home to take care of her. Charlotte's parents once supported me, I can't just abandon her. My eyes reddened. Just because of that? Edward fell silent for a moment, then abruptly extinguished his cigarette. "I promised to marry you." "Susan, what are you so worried about?" What was I so worried about? In reality, Edward knew what was bothering me, but he pretended not to. That night, my emotions suddenly got out of control, and I brought up breaking up for the first time. Edward's expression darkened. Without a word, he carried me into the bathroom, turned on the shower. "Do you know what you were saying just now?" I trembled, wrapping my arms around myself, his towering shadow looming over me. He unbuttoned my shirt, biting my lips almost punitively. "Susan, never mention breaking up with me." Cold water poured down, the scalding hot breath rolled over my neck, the face in front of me blurred. "Charlotte is just staying temporarily. Once the police find her ex-husband, I'll send her back." He whispered in my ear. "It's really over between me and her." I struggled, breathing heavily, threatening with closed eyes. "To make me agree, you'd have to kill me." Then, I really died. Edward really brought Charlotte back. Chapter 2. I watched Edward place the drunk Charlotte on the couch, using a warm towel to wipe her face. "You're pregnant, you shouldn't drink so much." His voice was deep, but his tone was very gentle, just like when he used to scold her for not paying attention in class. Charlotte didn't know if she heard it or not, mumbling in her mouth, complaining of a headache. Edward chuckled helplessly, helped her up, his slender fingers on her forehead, exerting a slight pressure, pressing from her forehead all the way to behind her ear, to her temple. It was a very heartwarming scene, making my heart tighten, as if it had paused for a few seconds, then suddenly woke up with a crackling sound. A fleeting moment. At that time, just after graduating from university, Edward's grandmother passed away, and because of Edward's family background, Charlotte's parents did not agree to their relationship, forcing Charlotte to marry someone else. During that dark 6 months, I accompanied Edward through it bit by bit. After 6 months, he accepted my confession. Later, he decided to start his own business and often went out for business dinners and drinks. I helped him wipe his face like this, cooked hangover soup for him, took care of him all night long. The next day, with dark circles under my eyes and a tired look, Edward looked at me for a long time, sighed, let me lie on his lap, and massaged me. I was a little surprised, but also very comfortable with the not-too-heavy massage, and playfully said, "Edward, you're not allowed to let others massage you in the future, okay?" After saying that, I regretted it. Just as I was about to speak to make amends, I heard Edward above me give a low laugh. "Okay." At that time, he said, "Okay. But also, how could Charlotte be considered as someone else?" I just suddenly became an exception to Edward, while she was his favorite all along. Chapter 3. Suddenly, I felt like I should leave here. I couldn't even bear to watch Edward massage Charlotte. What if one day their old feelings were rekindled? What about hugging? Kissing? Even. Just thinking about it, a sudden pain surged in my chest, my back felt like ants crawling on it, I couldn't sit still, desperately trying to run to the door. But as soon as I touched the door, a tearing pain abruptly struck, even more painful than the car accident back then, falling off the cliff and shattering. Before I could scream, my body was pulled back. After several attempts, my face was deathly pale, my whole body drenched in cold sweat, and I finally realized one thing. I couldn't leave this room. Or rather, I couldn't leave Edward. Instantly, I lost all my strength. I numbly continued to watch the two of them. Edward had just finished massaging Charlotte and was about to leave when a hand hooked around his neck. Charlotte opened her eyes. Their eyes met. "Edward, do you still like me?" Charlotte asked directly. Edward stared into her eyes. "I hate you." Charlotte's face went pale. His palm covered her cheek, fingers inching over it, sighing. "But I've never forgotten you either." I sarcastically curled my lips. Charlotte's eyes and brows softened into a smile, as if she suddenly remembered something, her gaze flashing. "What about Susan? She's been with you for 5 years, what are your feelings for her?" Edward paused, moved his lips, but didn't speak. The atmosphere suddenly quieted down. Charlotte's face changed slightly, her scrutinizing gaze falling on him. The next moment, she tilted her head slightly, kissed the corner of his lips. Edward's body visibly stiffened, but it was just for a moment. He took charge, sweeping his hand around her waist to make her sit on his lap, fingers clasping the back of her head, deepening the kiss. A wave of nausea rushed to my head. I covered my lips, afraid that my churning stomach would reach my chest in the next second. "Edward, he has already left me, please don't leave me. I don't want to be alone." Charlotte breathed softly, pleading against his lips. "I know you only feel gratitude and guilt towards her, the person you truly like is me." Charlotte's kiss landed on his collarbone, pausing slightly, reaching to unbutton his shirt. Edward suddenly grabbed her hand. "No." His voice was cold, his eyes equally so. A chill emanated from him, gradually spreading, making even my temperature-insensitive soul shiver from the cold. Charlotte stared at him blankly, as if she never expected to be rejected. "Is it because of Susan that you?" I also stared at him blankly, my uncontrollable heartbeat in disarray. After a moment of silence, Edward lowered his eyes, emotionless. "Charlotte, I have a girlfriend now. This isn't good for you." Charlotte understood, a slight smile curling at the corner of her lips. "I'll wait for you." I also understood, smiling sarcastically. Edward's meaning was clear, until we officially break up, he and Charlotte won't engage in any substantial misconduct. It has nothing to do with his character or how much respect he has for me, his legitimate girlfriend. He simply doesn't want Charlotte to bear any stains or moral condemnation. He treasures and protects her so much. Laughing, tears fell heavily. Chapter 4. After putting Charlotte to sleep, Edward smoked alone on the balcony. Tall and slender, his body almost blending with the night, only the bright red glow of his fingertips stood out. His face showed almost no expression, repeatedly rubbing the cigarette between his fingers, indicating his current restlessness. I was forced to float less than 2 meters away from him, looking at him coldly. They had already expressed their feelings to each other, so I didn't know why he was still restless. "Oh, we haven't broken up yet." Probably because of what just happened, he was unsatisfied. I thought. Suddenly, his phone rang. Edward almost immediately opened his phone, his exceptionally dark eyes fixed on the screen. The next second, a hint of disappointment flashed in his eyes. I felt a bit itchy inside and floated behind him to blatantly peek at the screen. As soon as I looked, I froze. Edward had opened the chat interface with me on WeChat. Since our big argument, we hadn't been in contact. The last chat record was a message I sent him. "Comrade Edward's birthday is in 7 days, what gift do you want?" Maybe he was too busy that day, or maybe he was at the hospital taking care of Charlotte, so he didn't reply. Now, Edward unconsciously scrolled his finger up and down, refreshing WeChat, as if by doing so, a message would appear. I didn't know how to react. In a daze, Edward had already sent a WeChat message. Edward said, "It's 11:30. In an instant, I understood his reminder. It was already 11:30 at night, his birthday was almost over. I, who hadn't missed his birthday in 5 years, always made him longevity noodles and celery dumplings. This year, I hadn't even said a word to wish him a happy birthday. But I wouldn't say it anymore. Never again. Because I was already dead." Chapter 5. After standing on the balcony for half an hour, enveloped in a cold aura, when Edward returned to the living room, his face was grim. He stared at the phone screen for a final 2 seconds, then impatiently tossed it onto the sofa. Taking long strides, he retrieved a bag of celery dumplings I had made but never eaten, intentionally left frozen in the refrigerator. Expressionless, he thawed the dumplings, cooked them, sat at the dining table, and earnestly ate them bite by bite with his head lowered. The gray-white smoke wafted up to his brow, making him seem colder and more distant. Looking at him quietly eating dumplings, a thought suddenly popped into my mind. Edward probably cares about me. I was surprised, and then it dawned on me. Strictly speaking, today wasn't Edward's actual birthday. Edward's real birthday was a week ago. But 5 years ago, on that day, Edward's grandmother passed away, and Charlotte also left him. Edward didn't want to celebrate his birthday anymore. It was my suggestion to move his birthday to a week later, and I always put effort into celebrating it, making longevity noodles and celery dumplings for him. As an orphan, my birthday was always the happiest day of the year for me at the welfare home. I just wanted to make him a little happier. The first time I celebrated his birthday, I secretly spent months learning the game he liked to play. I planned to stay up all night to pass the level with him, but I fell asleep against his thigh at 2 in the morning. When I woke up, Edward was holding his arm, looking at me with a cold smile. All night? The second time, I prepared a table full of dishes, cut several fingers, and only the longevity noodles and celery dumplings were edible. Edward finished them all, and to my surprise, he, who was usually reserved, praised the dumplings several times. I always like to rise to the occasion, standing tall with my chest out. Your heart isn't great, eating celery dumplings can lower blood pressure and heart rate, so I studied hard to make them taste good and look good. At that moment, Edward stared at me for a long time. "Susan, why are you so good to me?" I smiled. "Because I like you. I really like you." Before I could continue confessing, Edward held my chin and leaned in to kiss me. Edward always hid his emotions, but that was the first time I felt his intense emotions so openly. And then we ended up in bed. That night we were both inexperienced, exploring each other. But later, he seemed to figure it out on his own, holding my waist, his pitch-black eyes reflecting my tear-streaked face. Until the late night, silent and fierce. But the thick skin proved useful. The third and fourth times I celebrated his birthday, Edward silently acknowledged it. Looking back, the 5 years of deep affection and constant companionship seemed to have left a mark on his heart. Chapter 6. With a ding, I was snapped back from my wandering thoughts. Edward seemed lost in thought as well, not even noticing the spoon falling to the ground. I instinctively bent down to pick it up, but my incorporeal hand passed through it, leaving me stunned. Then the spoon was picked up by another hand. "What are you eating?" Charlotte's gentle voice echoed in the room. I opened my palm, looking at my hand that was becoming increasingly blurry, almost unable to solidify, then at Charlotte's slender and clean hands. Suddenly, I felt a bit inferior. Obviously, my hands were beautiful before I died. Now I can cook a table full of delicious dishes and easily pass levels in games, but now I can't even touch anything. What flavor are these dumplings? They smell strange. Charlotte asked as she took another spoon and leisurely stirred the dumplings in Edward's bowl. Edward frowned slightly but still answered. "Celery." Charlotte nodded absent-mindedly, looking up at Edward. "Why did Susan say today is your birthday?" Edward was slightly taken aback. Charlotte smiled openly. Your phone was on the couch just now, and I took a look at your chat history. She added. I didn't expect your lock screen password to still be the same, 0802, the day we first met. Edward lowered his head, and I couldn't see his emotions. My heart twitched slightly. I used to coax Edward to change his lock screen password to the day we got together, but he always refused. It turned out, it was because of her. Answer my question quickly, why did Susan say today is your birthday? I stared coldly at Charlotte. Edward had promised me before that this was a secret between him and me, and he wouldn't tell anyone. 5 years ago on that day, many bad things happened, so she said to postpone my birthday by a week and found ways to celebrate it for me. That familiar voice remained as low and cold as ever. I bit my tongue hard, a sweet and bloody taste rising quietly, rushing and spreading everywhere. Suddenly, I felt like laughing at myself. Charlotte fell silent for a moment. She really is good to you. Did she make these dumplings too? Specifically for your birthday?
Yeah.
You let me sleep first just to eat this? Keeping your promise with her? Edward didn't answer. The atmosphere fell into silence. Charlotte quickly scooped up a dumpling and suddenly said, I want to eat. No. I let out a hoarse and desperate scream. No one could hear me. I reached out to grab her spoon. Couldn't touch it. Edward's gaze darkened slightly as he grabbed her wrist, warning in a low voice. Charlotte. Charlotte stared into his eyes and repeated word by word. I want to eat. Edward, from now on, I will spend every birthday with you. She was forcing him to make a choice. Edward's jaw tightened, a hint of struggle flashing through his pitch-black pupils. After some time passed, he slowly released Charlotte's hand. Charlotte got to eat the dumplings as she wished. I watched blankly, tears continuously spilling from the corners of my eyes. It was not just about the dumplings. It was not just about the dumplings. These past few days, I floated in the corner, indifferently watching them, feeling like I had lost all emotions. But whether it was my illusion or not, after that day's incident, Edward became much colder towards Charlotte. Apart from playing games together, he and Charlotte had no other intimate gestures, intentionally even avoiding Charlotte's touch. One day, Charlotte suddenly asked. I've been forgetting to ask, where is Susan? Edward paused, his tone calm. We had an argument a few days ago, and she applied for a business trip with the company. Charlotte chuckled. Not contacting each other for so many days, maybe she's been wanting to break up with you. Edward's eyes darkened, very certain. Impossible. As he spoke, he subconsciously took out his phone, looking at the chat interface between me and him, a rare hint of unease and restlessness appearing on his brow. Oh, he still didn't know that I had died. I suddenly became curious about his reaction once he found out. Chapter 7. The next day, Edward received the ring I sent to him. The engagement ring he gave me. A month ago, Edward and I went to a restaurant for dinner. Halfway through, a man sitting across suddenly stood up, took out a ring without warning, and knelt down on one knee. Dressed sharply in a suit, elegant and handsome, meticulously groomed, his fingers slightly white from nervousness. The people around were cheering, he smiled, his eyes fixedly on me. Susan, marry me. Tears welled up in my eyes, trembling, I reached out my hand, letting him slide the ring onto my ring finger. That night, I was unusually passionate, holding his head, watching the broken light shadow above his head sway all night. After I was taken in by my foster parents, they had a son in the 2nd year. After a few years, they came up with some excuse to send me back. What excuse? It seemed like they accused me of stealing things. If being extremely hungry and eating the leftover chicken leg from my brother counts as stealing. Probably because of this reason, when I lost my lunch money at school, and someone suspected me, the moment Edward stood up to speak for me, he moved into my heart. Later, I was taken in by a not-so-wealthy couple. They were kind to me, but I remained cautious, keeping to myself. Even at the age of growing up, I dared only to fill half a bowl at meals. By the time I finally opened up, they died in a car accident on their way to a parent-teacher meeting for me. I returned to the Welfare Institute. No one wanted to adopt me again. My name is Susan, but I have never had stability. I really wish to have a real family. Now, Edward proposed to me. I thought I would finally have a family. But Charlotte came back. She was not doing well, and the first person she thought of was not her parents, but Edward. And my boyfriend, fiancé, dutifully helped her, even offering to bring her home to take care of her. After that unpleasant incident, I applied for a business trip with the company and went to Hangzhou. After a week of thinking, I express-mailed the engagement ring back. I want to break up with him. It was today, the moment Edward received that ring. At the sight of the ring, his face sank as if it could drip water, his eyes seemed to be covered with an impenetrable layer of ice. He kept messaging me, calling, questioning what I meant. Taking a puff of smoke after another, his facial features grew colder and harder, the almost overflowing impatience visible between his brows. The constant message notifications of being unable to connect kept coming from his end. It wasn't until he finished countless cigarettes, the cigarette box emptied, that he lowered his eyelids and softly said, "Susan, are you really going to leave me?" "Yes. I have already left, completely and thoroughly. You can finally be with Charlotte as you wished." I softly replied, even if he couldn't hear. Suddenly, I remembered something. I am a decisive person too. Since I had returned the ring to him at that time, deciding to break up, why did I rush back to celebrate his birthday? I tried hard to remember, feeling like I had forgotten something important. Chapter 8. I noticed Edward zoning out more often. At night, he was working in the study, and Charlotte thoughtfully brought him coffee. Without looking up, Edward blurted out, "Susan, it's too late now, you should rest first." Charlotte stared at him in astonishment. Edward also froze, softly saying, "Sorry," then rubbing his forehead as if trying to conceal something. After that, he seemed lost in thought, staring at that page without flipping it, completely oblivious to Charlotte's distressed expression beside him. The next day, Charlotte went to clean Edward's bedroom. She somehow managed to pack up my things without a word, and accidentally knocked over the Lego set we had built together. Edward, rare in showing his displeasure, said to her, "Don't touch these." Then he pushed her hand away and carefully, piece by piece, focused on reassembling the scattered blocks. The longer he spent piecing them together, the longer Charlotte silently watched beside him. In his interactions with Charlotte, Edward often seemed absent-minded. He would get lost in thought looking at the sunflowers I planted on the balcony, at the clothes I bought for him in the wardrobe, at the goldfish I raised in the fish tank. I floated in the air, calmly watching Charlotte's increasingly pale face. It wasn't just Charlotte, I realized it too. Edward seems to slowly be realizing his true feelings. I squinted, staring at the man I had loved for a lifetime on the sofa. He seemed a bit drunk, his brows furrowed, a blush appearing on his handsome face. He was on the phone with his friend, Hamilton. "Do you really want Susan or Charlotte?" Hamilton asked. He fell silent for a moment. "Susan has broken up with me." "So, it's Charlotte?" He instinctively furrowed his brows. Hamilton seemed to have guessed something. "Edward, the heart is small, love can only be given to one person. Go find Susan." Edward didn't speak, bowing his head, his fingers gently touching the engagement ring. After a while, "Okay." I silently watched him. If this had happened before, maybe I would have felt happy. But now, I am dead. I am dead. Restlessness crawled into my heart like ants, drilling deeper and deeper, growing more and more restless, inexplicable emotions swirling in my mind, I could hardly catch my breath. Chapter 9. Hamilton asked him to take Charlotte to her parents' house, he agreed, and at the same time, he bought a plane ticket to where I was on a business trip. That day, he seemed to intend to talk to Charlotte about this matter. Just as he returned home, Charlotte came out with a bowl of soup. Charlotte, who usually refrained from worldly affairs, personally cooked a sumptuous dinner that day, even specially making fresh celery dumplings. That day was my fault, forcing you to make a choice. I was just too scared of losing you. I didn't want to get married at that time either, but my mom used suicide to threaten me. In those 5 years of marriage to someone else, not a day went by without me thinking of you. She wore my apron, looking pitifully at Edward. Tears flowed one after another, the corners of her eyes red, as if stained with rouge. I know you have her in your heart now, but I can wait for you. Don't rush me to leave. She wrapped her arms around his waist, burying her face in his chest, carefully holding on to his clothes, her voice breaking in a way that was heart-wrenching. At least, spend some more time with me. When she comes back, I'll leave. Okay? Edward didn't speak. But he didn't push her away either. He sighed softly, gently wiping away her tears. Stop crying, it's not good for the child. He still softened. A dull pain spread from my heart, a strong bitterness surged through my body. How much love for one person would it take to be disappointed in him time and time again? Over these 5 years, I exhausted all my passion, wholeheartedly being good to him, just to barely secure a place in his heart. But she only shed a few tears, and he compromised. Chapter 10. After learning that Charlotte was going to stay a bit longer, Hamilton's expression was complicated. Aren't you afraid that Susan will actually leave you once she finds out? Charlotte and I are just friends now. Edward stood unusually straight, his face never showing any change. By the time Susan calms down and comes back, Charlotte will have left. She won't find out. Hamilton sighed, saying nothing more. I watched all of this expressionlessly, increasingly looking forward to seeing Edward's reaction once he realizes I am already dead. In these past few days, Edward has been accompanying Charlotte as agreed. They haven't engaged in any improper behavior, their interaction pattern truly resembling that of normal friends. And I have been trying hard to remember what I had forgotten, why I rushed back to celebrate his birthday. Deep down, there's a premonition that when I remember this, my soul won't be bound to Edward anymore, I will truly be liberated. But every time I try to recall, my head feels like it's exploding in pain. Just as I was feeling disheartened, Edward accompanied Charlotte to the mall, and they happened to see baby products, so Charlotte pulled him inside. Charlotte picked up a princess dress, giggling as she covered her mouth. I really wish I had a daughter in my belly, then I could buy her all sorts of beautiful dresses. Edward, do you like sons or daughters? Charlotte curiously asked. Daughters, I guess. Edward's lips curved slightly upwards, his gaze falling on those baby products. Under the sunlight, his dark pupils emitted a few glimmers, looking somewhat tender. Susan likes it. Then he added. I will like whatever she gives birth to. I stood there dumbfounded. The floodgates of memory suddenly opened, my head splitting with pain, countless images rushing in like untamed horses breaking free. I don't know how long had passed, I lay motionless on the ground. Crying turned into laughter, laughter turned into tears. Trembling, I placed my hand on my abdomen. I remembered. The reason I rushed back to celebrate Edward's birthday, the reason I wanted to give each other another chance, was because I am pregnant. After receiving the diagnosis report, I thought about it all night and decided to have a good talk with Edward. The night before his birthday, I rushed over. I planned to present this matter as a birthday gift to him in person. In the car, I caressed my belly, imagining what expression Edward would have when he heard this news. Would he burst into laughter? Probably not, he always had that expressionless face, at most slightly curling his lips, looking at me seriously. Susan, I'm actually quite happy that you're pregnant. Would he look forward to this child like I do? Probably. On the night of the proposal, he breathed softly in my ear, his warm breath. Susan, after we get married, let's have a child. I've always known that you want a big family. Yes, I want a big family. How does Edward understand me so well? Thinking about it, I actually started laughing. The driver saw this through the rearview mirror and asked me what I was laughing about. I didn't answer, just smiled and asked him to focus on driving. After all, it was raining heavily outside, safety first. The journey was a bit boring, so I restrained myself from impulsively sending a message to Edward and instead started browsing Weibo. Then I noticed someone was following me. It was Charlotte. I opened Charlotte's Weibo. I found that she had posted only photos of Edward. From the photos on her Weibo, I saw how meticulously Edward had been taking care of her at the hospital during her pregnancy these days, watching how their old feelings were reignited step by step. Like a newlywed couple who had just had a child. The injection hurts, but with you by my side, I'm not afraid. The picture showed Edward's serene profile and their interlocked hands. After all the twists and turns, you're still the best to me. The picture showed Edward, who was usually a neat freak, bowing his head to peel shrimp for her. Last night you fell asleep by the bedside, I secretly kissed you, I know you weren't asleep. This Weibo post had no photo attached. But Edward gave her a like. I stared fixedly at the screen, my heart suddenly tightening, feeling as though all my blood was rushing to my brain. How much filth must one see in a lifetime? I don't want to see anymore. And then, heaven truly didn't let me see anymore. At the edge of the cliff, a red heavy truck suddenly lost control, crashing straight towards us. We rolled off the cliff with the truck, and then an explosion followed. I rushed over, full of anticipation and joy. But I died with despair and hatred. The intense shock temporarily made me lose this part of my memory, but the piercing hatred made my soul leave my body and follow Edward. Turns out, it wasn't because I loved him that I couldn't leave him. It was because I hated him. When I died with my child in my belly. What was Edward doing? He was taking care of others and their children. Perhaps sensing something, Edward, who was talking to Charlotte, suddenly furrowed his brow and subconsciously looked around, but found nothing. At that moment, his phone rang. Hamilton's trembling voice came through the phone. Edward, I need to tell you something. Please don't get upset. I have a brother who is a traffic policeman, and there has been a serious traffic accident on his end. All passengers and the driver died, and the identity of a pregnant woman was only discovered today. That pregnant woman is Susan. Chapter 11. I have imagined countless times how Edward would react when he found out about my death. Now, I finally see it. This man was just chatting and laughing with his first love, but upon hearing this news, he paused for a moment, furrowed his brow slightly, and said, "Don't make such jokes." It's true. Edward was stunned for a few seconds, then sternly rebuked. Hamilton, don't make these kinds of jokes. A week ago, the taxi she was in collided with a truck, fell off a cliff, and exploded. Due to only a small amount of body remains at the scene, and no missing person report from the pregnant woman's family, a whole week passed. Hamilton choked up on the other end, as if he couldn't continue. After a whole week, the police confirmed Susan's identity through DNA matching. Edward's face gradually changed, his whole body seemed to stiffen into a wooden sculpture. Edward, she was pregnant, did you know about this? She was missing for a whole week, and you never went to look for her? With each of Hamilton's questions, Edward's face had lost all color, his lips trembling violently. It's impossible, it's impossible. You're lying to me. Edward. Charlotte worriedly looked at him from the side, reaching out to gently hold his hand. Hamilton paused on the phone, his tone unable to convey whether it was sarcasm or mockery. Are you now with Charlotte? The air fell silent for several seconds. Well, it makes sense. For the week Susan was missing, you were with her the whole time. Edward hesitated for a moment, almost immediately realizing, forcefully pushing away Charlotte's hand, his eyes reddening, his expression tense, like a child who had done something wrong. Her body is now at the funeral home. The police have notified her family to come and claim it. You should go there later. Hamilton fell silent for a long time. She doesn't have any family, only you. Edward stood there blankly, his tall figure suddenly slumping slightly, then slowly squatting down, curling up motionless, repeating one phrase under his breath. It's impossible, it's impossible. It seemed that was all he could say. He refused to believe that I was dead. I watched this scene coldly and with satisfaction. After regaining my memory, I felt that intense hatred towards him, almost consuming me. But after the thrill of revenge passed, an endless exhaustion and desolation crept into my heart. Love and hate both required too much effort. I lived so tired, and even in death, I felt exhausted. Chapter 12. After regaining my memory, I didn't immediately disappear. Apart from my soul becoming somewhat transparent, I was still bound to Edward, just with a slightly larger range of movement. I followed Edward to the funeral home. This man, who usually kept his emotions in check, now stood stiffly by the door, not daring to approach. The staff inside sighed. It was already difficult to find so many charred remains, the body is a patchwork. Oh, it said she was pregnant. Yes, the wrist and finger joints are severely bent and deformed, she must have been trying desperately to protect the child in her belly at that time. Edward's face was ashen, his body swaying slightly. If he hadn't braced himself against the wall, it seemed like he might collapse at any moment. The staff noticed Edward. "Are you a family member? Come over." Edward walked over slowly, unsteadily. The two staff members left, leaving him alone in the room. The tall shadow blocked the light above his head, his back tense straight, his fist clenched so tightly his nails dug into his flesh without his notice. He looked at my body covered by a white cloth, starting to mutter to himself. "On the way here just now, I suddenly remembered something I never told you." The cold tone was slightly trembling, but not much, just like usual. We were both so young back then. One day, I went downstairs to buy something, and there was a playful boy who took some change from a blind grandmother's bowl on the street. You suddenly rushed over and got into a scuffle with him. You were so slender, but you viciously twisted his hand, and in the end, that boy couldn't take it anymore and gave you a coin he had in his hand. I had heard them say before that you were an orphan who liked to steal. But at that time, your hair was messy, there was a bruise on your lip. You gasped for a moment on the ground, then stood up and put the money in the blind grandmother's bowl, and left calmly. The blind grandmother couldn't see this scene, the little boy wouldn't tell, but I saw it. After that incident, I involuntarily started paying attention to you. My gaze always falling on you, and when someone in our class falsely accused you of stealing class fees, my immediate reaction was to stand up and speak for you. I think I'll never forget the brightness in your eyes at that moment in my life. Later, your gaze gradually fell on me too, we blushed when we made eye contact, you would stare at me absent-mindedly. During those years, at the school's Outstanding Student Awards ceremony, you stood beside me, during basketball games, you handed me water. When I won the sprint race, you smiled and handed me flowers to congratulate me, in the math competition team, you accompanied me to win the championship together. And then, Charlotte appeared. He paused for a moment, covering his face with his hand, as if something was flowing out from between his fingers. Susan, clearly, I was the one who first noticed you, you also fell in love with me, why did I end up falling for someone else? I watched him silently, thinking that everything was calm, but waves of pain were stirring inside me. Yes. Why? I was the one who met him first, so why did we end up here now? I wasn't a lively and cheerful person. But in front of Edward, I always made myself shine like a little sun, trying my best to be good to him. I've never been this gentle with anyone, and I won't be this gentle with anyone else. Susan, the moment I proposed to you, I truly wanted to be with you for the rest of my life. Susan, please understand me. Understand me, okay? Susan. Susan. Wife. He called out again and again. No one responded to him. He started to feel anxious, even agitated, his lips turning pale, calling my name repeatedly until his voice became hoarse, until he couldn't call out anymore. You promised that you'd never leave me. His voice was confused, hoarse as if squeezed from deep within his throat. His shoulders trembling non-stop, his eyes bloodshot, like a desperate and hopeless beast at the end of his tether, appearing terrifying yet pitiful. I watched this man in utter despair quietly. Perhaps, only at this moment did he truly realize that I was already dead. Chapter 13. After receiving my ashes, Edward locked himself in his room. I felt my soul growing weaker, curling up on the ground to sleep in exhaustion. In a haze, I heard Charlotte continuously knocking on the door, her voice filled with urgent tears. Edward, it's been 3 days, please eat something, okay? Even if she's gone, you can't treat your body like this. If she knew, she would definitely feel heartbroken. I woke up from a daze, rubbed my eyes, and subconsciously glanced at the closed door. Has it already been 3 days? An hour later, Hamilton came over. He rudely kicked open the door, and a strong smell of smoke and alcohol instantly spread out. The harsh light poured into the room, enveloping the man on the ground. Cigarette butts were scattered around him, empty and toppled bottles of alcohol, and my urn. He was quietly concentrating on building with Lego. Lego pieces we hadn't finished together before. Although only a few days had passed, Edward looked significantly thinner, with a layer of stubble on his chin and sunken eye sockets. Edward. Charlotte's voice was hoarse. Hearing the commotion, he slowly looked up, his eyes hollow and indifferent like a neglected machine, bloodshot and cold. Why haven't you left yet? He seemed to be lost in thought, murmuring softly. Susan wouldn't be happy to see you. Charlotte's face turned pale. Lost in thought, he suddenly raised his head, a hint of panic between his brows, speaking to Charlotte in a cold and ruthless tone. This is mine and Susan's home, you have no right to be here. Charlotte stared at him in disbelief, tears rolling down her cheeks. Edward furrowed his brow, seeming a bit impatient. Get lost. Seeing that he was unmoved, Charlotte looked embarrassed, crying as she ran away. Edward continued building with Lego expressionlessly, seemingly indifferent. If only you had done this earlier. Hamilton suddenly spoke up. Edward's face turned deathly pale, his fingers trembling, and the Lego pieces fell to the ground. He stared at the fallen Lego piece, his eyes filled with pain and sorrow. That day, we had a big fight. I told her that we should bring Charlotte back home to take care of her. If it wasn't for that, she wouldn't have applied for the business trip, and she wouldn't have. The day she had the accident, she took a shortcut, she was rushing back. Rushing back to give me a birthday gift. She wanted to give me the news of her pregnancy as a birthday present. And what was I doing at that time? Edward covered his chest with his hand, closed his eyes in pain. While she was away, I brought Charlotte home. He took a deep breath, then started building with Lego again, but his fingers were shaking, dropping one piece after another. Hamilton, I regret it. I truly regret it. Hamilton stood upright, silently watching him, his voice soft. It's said that those who betray true hearts will eventually face retribution. But, at the cost of her death, isn't she too pitiful? Edward's eyes were red, staring blankly, unable to say a word. Hamilton let out a long sigh. The way you are right now, she wouldn't be happy. Edward, no matter what, you have to keep on living. Chapter 14. A few days later, Edward insisted on arranging a funeral for me. Under a drizzle, the sky was gray, and the entire city seemed to be shrouded in gloom. Edward stood silently in front of the tombstone without an umbrella, looking at my black and white photo on it. The tombstone read, Deceased Wife Susan. One by one, people placed white chrysanthemums at the foot of my tombstone. After the funeral, Edward stood motionless, rain trickling down his hair, leaving a trail of watermarks on his pale cheeks. Hamilton brought an umbrella and handed it to him. Do you know you have a weak heart? Any cold could lead to an infection. Do you have to be at odds with your own body? Edward emotionlessly discarded the umbrella. Then let me die from illness. Sure enough, after that day, Edward fell seriously ill. What was initially just a minor cold escalated into an infection because he refused to take medicine, resulting in a 2-week hospital stay. At night, the hospital room was quiet. Edward stared blankly at the silent darkness outside, speaking softly in a puzzled tone. Susan, why haven't you appeared in my dreams even once? You once promised to take care of my heart. Now I've made it sick. Will you come back to see how I am? After being discharged, just as he was recovering, Edward ended up in the ICU again due to alcohol-induced infection. Hamilton stared coldly at him, his eyes devoid of emotion, and gave him a hard slap. If you want to die, why don't I just slap you to death? Back when you were doing those disgusting things, I wanted to slap you on Susan's behalf. She's gone. Who are you trying to impress with this act now? Yourself? Do you find it moving? I'm telling you, if your grandmother wasn't kind to me and asked me to watch over you, I wouldn't bother with you. If Susan saw you behaving in this self-righteous manner, she would only feel disgusted, understand? Edward's face turned ashen, staring at him blankly. It's unclear whether Edward absorbed Hamilton's words, but after that day, he no longer wallowed, nor did he mistreat his body. He calmly went to work and calmly continued living. But, I always felt he was a bit strange. At night, he would stand on the balcony and smoke for a while. The smoke slowly enveloped his blurred face, adding to the sense of loneliness and desolation, unable to dispel the chill that surrounded him. After finishing the cigarette, he would go to the fridge and take out that bag of dumplings. There weren't many dumplings left, probably a dozen or so, and Edward would cook a few every day to eat. Before going to bed, he would quietly look at my urn for a while and softly say, "Good night." I found myself no longer following Edward all the time, feeling constantly drowsy and inexplicably tired, just staying in the room sleeping every day. These days, he seemed to be very busy with work, always coming back very late. I didn't know what he was busy with until Hamilton called him. "What do you mean by transferring all your shares in the company to me?" He answered calmly. "Just want to take a break. I heard you donated a large sum of money to the orphanage? Is it because of her?" Edward just gave a faint Consider it as me atoning. Hamilton fell silent for a moment and changed the subject. Charlotte's ex-husband somehow came back to her, and they had a dispute. He pushed Charlotte, causing her to miscarry. Her ex-husband turned himself in at the police station, and Charlotte is still unconscious in the hospital. I heard the situation is not good, she might not be able to have children in the future. Edward remained expressionless throughout, as if this incident didn't stir any emotions in him. "I'm going to bed, I'll hang up first." A few more days passed, and Edward returned home from work, as usual, going to the balcony to smoke for a while. When he came back and saw there were only a few dumplings left in the fridge, he paused for a moment, then suddenly smiled. It was a smile of acceptance, relaxation, and perhaps even joy. I furrowed my brows slightly. Instead of eating the dumplings immediately, he went alone to the mall. He went to the mother and baby section, carefully and patiently inquired with the salesperson, bought some baby products. And then went downstairs to the flower shop and bought a lot of roses. The aunt at the shop couldn't stop smiling when he paid. "Your girlfriend used to love buying flowers from me the most. By the way, I haven't seen her in a long time, where did she go?" Edward just stood quietly for a moment. "She's away on a business trip." The aunt nodded. "The flowers in the evening aren't very fresh. Come by tomorrow during the day, I'll give you." "No need, aunt." He gently but firmly refused, each word deliberate. "Tonight, I'm going on a business trip too." The aunt paused, covering her mouth teasingly. "I get it, missing your girlfriend, huh?" "Yes." Edward's lips curved with a faint smile, his long eyelashes hanging down. "I miss her a lot. Really, I really miss her." Back home, Edward sat at the dining table, quietly and seriously finished the last few dumplings, drinking the soup cleanly as well. Then, he took a bath, changed into clean clothes, placed the roses and baby products on the bed, and looked at them for a while with lowered eyes. After doing all this, he took out a fruit knife from the drawer, which had been placed there at some point, and a bottle of sleeping pills bought at some unknown time. He opened the sleeping pills, poured them all out, and then picked them up one by one, putting them into his mouth. I shuddered all over, staring at him intently. Indescribable restlessness surged through me, unstoppable and sharp, resonating through my bones, muscles, and skin, gradually enveloping my entire body. He actually wanted to commit suicide. When he picked up the fruit knife, placed it against his wrist, and calmly made a light cut, I screamed. "On what grounds?" With a clatter, the fruit knife fell to the ground. "Susan." Blood continued to flow from the wound on his wrist, the smell of blood spreading, but Edward seemed unaware, staring at me dumbly. Indeed, when one is close to death, they will see the person they want to see. "Susan, I miss you so much." I struggled to control my emotions, speaking in a cold tone. But I don't want to see you at all. Edward's face paled, he stood up with some difficulty, picked up the bouquet of roses and baby clothes from the bed, and a smile that could be considered pleasing tugged at his lips. This is a gift for you and the child. His fingers fidgeted with the two pieces of clothing, and he lowered his head somewhat uncomfortably. I don't know if it's a daughter or a son, so I bought both. I looked at him coldly. We don't need any of this. His body stiffened slightly, still looking down. I know you're still angry with me. I shouldn't have argued with you that day. Charlotte was just a lingering regret from my youth. I have always loved you. Truly, always, it has always been you. Hamilton said that those who betray true love must pay a price, so I'm here to be with you. Susan, I was wrong, please forgive me. With each word he spoke, it felt like a needle piercing my heart, and the tension in my body's nerves completely snapped at that moment. I took a deep breath, then suddenly smiled. Do you know what I saw last when I had the accident that day? Edward looked up blankly. I stared into his eyes, emphasizing each word. I saw Charlotte's Weibo. Edward's face went ashen. I saw how meticulously you took care of her in the hospital. How you held her hand when she was afraid of needles. How you carefully peeled shrimp for her. How she tried to steal a kiss from you, and how you liked her Weibo posts. I died with hatred towards you. So, Edward, how dare you ask for my forgiveness? Edward staggered, his face drained of color. He moved his lips but couldn't speak, his eyes filled with deep pain and regret. Was this the pain he deserved? Not enough. I forced a faint smile, tilting my head up to him. Edward, did you enjoy the dumplings you ate with Charlotte on your birthday? Edward hesitated slightly. How did you know? His pupils widened suddenly, as if realizing something, fear spreading in his eyes. I met his gaze, my smile growing brighter. Because my soul never left these days. Edward, this is not a hallucination you're having on your deathbed. And, I have been watching you all along. Edward froze, as if a strong, indescribable, deep despair engulfed his entire body. His lips trembled violently, his eyes red to the point of almost shedding blood. I watched you kiss shamelessly on the sofa I bought, watched you eat the celery dumplings I made. Watched you tell our secrets to her. Watched you use the gaming console I gifted you. Watched you choose her over and over again between me and her. Edward, I died in agony and despair with the child, and you knew nothing. You held Charlotte, planning to break up with me, openly being with her. I vividly exposed all of this, feeling like I was screaming inside, my eyes stinging and swelling with pain, everything in front of me turning blurry. So, Edward, just because you now realize your true feelings, you have to hypocritically commit suicide to be with me, to prove your so-called deep affection? Why should you? Edward was now curled up on the ground, holding his head, his gaze empty, tears actually streaming from his eyes. Warm blood flowed along his nose, down his chin, dripping onto the two baby clothes, staining them inch by inch into a deep red, a red so intense and desperate. Edward seemed to suddenly come to his senses, staring blankly at the two pieces of clothing, his voice dry and stiff. The clothes are dirty. The clothes are dirty. He fumbled to wipe them clean, the fresh blood from his wrist also dripping onto the clothes. He froze, trembling helplessly, looking at me with despair and sadness. Susan, the clothes for the baby are dirty. What should I do? I looked at him, my heart felt like it was being tightly squeezed by a giant hand, the pain almost suffocating me. I closed my eyes. Edward, you don't deserve to commit suicide, you don't deserve to be with us. You must live, forever in endless pain. The room fell into an extreme silence. Edward was so quiet that not even his breathing could be heard. After an unknown amount of time, he choked softly. Okay. Hearing that okay, as if some invisible shackle had been removed, my soul suddenly felt lighter. In my final consciousness, it seemed like I saw Edward calling for an ambulance. He deeply looked at me one last time. I have already transferred all my shares in the company to Hamilton. I will donate the remaining money to an orphanage. Susan, I will have nothing, living long and enduringly, using a lifetime to atone. I finally closed my eyes, ready to go to a new world. I hope. In the next life, I hope to have parents who love me, a husband who loves and respects me, and a few beautiful and lovely children. But please, don't let me encounter Edward again.